On July 14, 2025, the U.S. stunned markets by abruptly scrapping its long-standing tomato trade pact with Mexico and slapping a 17% tariff on imports. No warning, no transition, just a sudden break. Within days, shelves across American supermarkets looked bare and prices jumped. But instead of retaliating directly, Mexico made a bold pivot. It rerouted its $2.8 billion tomato exports through Canada, launching a refrigerated rail corridor that completely bypassed U.S. checkpoints. What began as a tariff shock quickly morphed into one of the most impressive logistics shifts in recent trade history. A simple tomato became the centerpiece of a continental supply chain realignment. Here's how it unfolded. 1. Tariff shockwave, the sudden end of a 30-year pact. The crisis began when the U.S. Department of Commerce terminated the tomato suspension agreement with Mexico, a pact first signed in 1996 and last renewed in 2019. The agreement had set minimum prices and inspection protocols to prevent Mexican growers from undercutting U.S. farmers. Its termination blindsided grocers, importers, and analysts who had expected negotiations, not a hard stop. Officials in Washington framed the move as a necessary step to protect American farmers, especially in Florida. The Florida Tomato Exchange celebrated it as overdue protection. But the timing raised eyebrows. Earlier in the year, Washington had already raised tariffs broadly, 25% on most Mexican and Canadian imports. By mid-July, the average U.S. tariff had climbed to nearly 18.4%, one of the highest levels in decades. The impact was immediate. Mexico supplies roughly 70% of fresh tomatoes consumed in the U.S., a market worth about $3 billion annually. Overnight, the flow slowed. Prices spiked 30 to 45% in major cities, especially in midsummer when domestic crops are at their weakest. A basic food staple had suddenly turned into a geopolitical flashpoint, and the ripple effects went far beyond grocery store shelves. 2. From grocery bags to paychecks. The fallout hits home. Consumers felt the squeeze first. National retailers like Walmart and Kroger raised prices quickly, with some tomato packs doubling in price. In border states such as Texas and Arizona, where Mexican produce dominates, the shock was worse. School cafeterias and fast food chains cut tomato use. In one Illinois district, a teacher recalled students asking, "Where's the red?" as salads arrived without tomatoes. Families relying on SNAP benefits began abandoning fresh produce altogether, forced into cheaper, less nutritious alternatives. But the deeper damage came in jobs and logistics. Import companies, many of them Latino-owned, shut down in Florida and Texas. Warehouses in Laredo and McAllen went dark. Trucking firms lost contracts. The supply chain became unstable, with unpredictable pricing and delivery schedules. In states far from the border, New York, Minnesota, Michigan, consumers either faced steeply higher prices or empty shelves. What looked like a trade policy decision quickly turned into a blow for livelihoods across multiple sectors. While U.S. consumers and businesses scrambled, Mexico was already executing a counter-strategy. 3. Mexico's tactical detour from tariffs to rail tracks. Rather than fight Washington at the negotiating table, Mexico shifted to infrastructure and innovation. Within 3 months, Mexican agribusiness leaders partnered with Canadian Pacific Kansas City, CPKC, to open a refrigerated rail corridor stretching more than 2,000 kilometers. Tomatoes were shipped from Bahia and Chihuahua straight into Ontario and Quebec, held in containers kept at 1 degree Celsius. The benefits were enormous. Rail reduced logistics costs by roughly 15% compared to trucking through U.S. checkpoints. The cold chain also extended shelf life by up to 5 days, cutting spoilage and increasing profit margins. Even better, the corridor bypassed U.S. customs entirely. Marketed as a bonded and tariff-free route, it turned a trade blockade into a trade advantage. Mexico hadn't just survived the tariff, it had outmaneuvered it, creating a permanent alternative that rewired continental supply chains. 4. Canada's steps. Uncertainty, contracts, and market share for Mexico's tomatoes needed buyers. Canada saw an opportunity. Major retailers like Loblaws, Metro, and Sobeys toured Mexican farms, inspected growing conditions, and signed multi-year contracts running through 2030. As one Ottawa official put it, Mexico didn't fight the tariff, they outgrew it. By 2026, nearly half, 48%, of Mexico's fresh tomato exports are projected to flow north into Canada, compared to less than 1% just 2 years earlier. And the shift is not limited to tomatoes. The corridor now carries avocados, strawberries, and peppers, deepening Mexico's agricultural reach into Canadian markets. Canada responded by building infrastructure to match. Cold storage hubs like the one in Windsor opened fully booked into 2026. Streamlined customs procedures and efficient rail logistics reduced landing costs by about 8% per crate, making Canadian imports both stable and competitive. While U.S. policy grew unpredictable, Canada became the dependable anchor Mexico needed. 5. From tomatoes to trade routes. The global shift takes root. What started as a workaround for tomatoes soon reshaped international trade dynamics. European ports like Rotterdam and Hamburg began drafting new blueprints to bypass U.S. trade corridors altogether, exploring Brazil to Canada cold chain links for perishable goods. U.S. hubs like Houston and Los Angeles quietly lost influence as new routes gained traction. Asian economies took notice too. Trade delegations from Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan visited Mexico's industrial centers to study how it built resilience without confronting Washington head-on. A Korean official even described Mexico as a case study in modern trade survival. Even labeling rules adapted. By late 2025, Canadian firms were selling tomatoes legally marked Product of Canada under USMCA rules, despite the goods being grown in Mexico. This blurred trade identity further embedded Mexican supply into Canada's shelves while keeping U.S. tariffs irrelevant. Analysts warn that if this cold chain model expands into auto parts, semiconductors, or medical supplies, U.S. economic losses could exceed $69 billion over 5 years. The world isn't waiting for Washington to stabilize, it's investing in alternatives. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Stay tuned for more updates and content. We've got plenty more coming your way.